to the 2022 RCSI alumni in conversation with Dr. David Knight, the class of 1981, and Dr. Kate Coleman, the class of 1985. My name is Professor Camilla Carroll, class of 1985, and I will be your host for the next hour. For over 200 years, RCSI has been committed to the global education and training of healthcare workers. RCSI is committed to an educational program which promotes equality, diversity, and service to society through our endeavors. Being a surgeon requires a lifelong commitment to the pursuit of professional excellence in order to better serve our patients. And the surgeon-patient relationship is truly unique, and it is one that must be built on trust. Our two alumni tonight, Dr. David Knight and Dr. Kate Coleman, have dedicated their professional surgical lives to the pursuit of excellence and to giving back. What I would like to do is go back to perhaps where it all began. David, you came to RCSI from the US, having done something before you arrived here. Could you tell us a little bit about that and why you chose Dublin and particularly RCSI to study medicine?
As best I can tell, I've always wanted to be a doctor from age 8. I went to Harvard as an undergraduate. I had a good time, probably a better time than I was supposed to have. And when I graduated from Harvard, medical school was very competitive admission, and I didn't get in. So I worked in a lab in Boston for 3 years. And one of the strange experiences, many strange experiences and coincidences in my life, was that in the space of a week, 2 people came through the lab and told me about this medical school in Ireland that would take Americans. So I applied, and fortunately I was accepted, and that's how I actually ended up at RCSI.
You know, we never associate Harvard with having fun. It's like the place to go and study hard. So good to hear that you enjoyed your time there. Kate, could you tell us how you ended up studying medicine and why you chose RCSI, please?
I suppose I never wanted to study anything else, Camilla. I wanted at one stage to be an air hostess and travel the world, and my parents said no problem. When you're a doctor, you can then go and be an air hostess. It was always about giving back and the pleasure in that, and I was just very, very lucky to have insight into that reward of being able to help a human being in that other space and to not get bored at the same time. I was very privileged to go to the College of Surgeons because I knew from my medical contacts that College of Surgeons actually runs the postgraduate training system for Ireland. And with that, it meant I had the ability to train as an undergraduate with the very people who were leading the postgraduate system. And if one had the choice, then it was clearly the preferred route. The most exciting bit really was that when we were in college, we had the largest class for many years, 145, and it's now much bigger. And a third were from what were called developing countries at the time, and a third were from developed, and then a third from Ireland. And so it was armchair travel in a day where travel was very expensive. It was the most astonishing experience to be completely equal and at one and trying to pass the same exams with these people from all over the world.
You know, I think, Kate, you really summed it up there with the armchair tourism, but the fact that we were all equal. We were all on a level playing field, helping each other. David, I'm going to come back to you now. Would you like to tell us, please, about the organization that you co-founded and collaborate with colleagues in the US and in Liberia, and how that evolved?
In 2009, one of my chief residents here in Waterbury was in the emergency room at night to see a patient, and he's actually from Ghana originally, and he was talking to one of the emergency room doctors, who it turns out was born in Liberia and came to the United States when he was 14 with his mother to escape the Civil War. And he set up an organization called HEART in 2005 at the end of the war. And he told my resident that he was bringing pediatricians and pediatric residents and emergency room physicians and residents to Liberia, but he needed a surgeon. And he said, Robert, do you know anybody who might be interested? And Robert, God bless his soul, said, yes, I know exactly who'd be interested. So he told me about it, and I said, oh, yes, I would love to do that. That sounds interesting. And that was in August, and we planned the trip for the following March. It wasn't for a couple of months. It was probably later, like October or November, when I realized that this emergency room doctor was the youngest son of Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, who was the president of Liberia. She was the first democratically elected female president of any country in Africa. And she has subsequently become a friend of mine. When I first went to Liberia, I thought I would go once and it would be interesting, but I really didn't see it. I didn't expect it to turn out to be a long-term experience. But when I was there, I realized that I couldn't not come back. I needed to come back. So that started our journey. And as I said, before COVID, we've been going for 2 weeks each March and September. Just to add to that, I find it interesting because having been doing this for a little over 10 years, our work has evolved. We've morphed into a much more educational function, and it started, the middle years were sort of basic surgical education, helping to train Liberians in surgery. And we're now moving into a specialization phase where they've learned basics, and we're being able to bring them new technology and new expertise.
Thank you, David. Kate, I know you have worked very hard over a decade or more in advocating for the right to sight. Can you please tell us a little bit about how you set up your organization?
Well, I went to a conference given by the Irish College of Ophthalmology in 2005, and we had this wonderful guest speaker called Professor Alan Foster, and he was sharing with us that the incidence of needless cataract blindness in Africa was huge, that they had fewer than one cataract surgeon per million, that the average surgeon in Africa was getting to do, and there was a paper on it, 243 operations a year. So I was listening to this, having all the latest equipment to do a new rapid technique, which changed the duration of the operation from an hour and a half, the traditional extra caps technique, to 10 minutes. And it had transformed the way we could deliver care. Our patients usually did not get scars after surgery. They could see immediately when their dressings were taken off. They didn't need to stay in hospital. And I couldn't believe it when Professor Foster told us this. It meant you could only do 2 to 3 operations on an operation list, as opposed to my colleagues in Aravind in India, where they do 16 an hour. So the cost of doing 16 operations an hour with one eye surgeon and one assistant is a fraction of the cost of doing 3 in a morning. The most significant costs for the operation were the cost of the surgeon and the highly trained staff. And so it just meant the same day's salaries got hundreds more done. And where there was poverty, a lot of people could be cross-subsidized by the wealthy. So I was listening to Professor Foster and I thought, there is nothing there bringing the cutting-edge technology to my colleagues in Africa, to people who basically had been in the College of Surgeons with me and were very highly trained And they did not have the opportunities I had. So the result was none of my colleagues were actually choosing eye surgery. They were all choosing actually public health medicine, which we love, but that's where the income was. So I understood that there would never be enough surgeons in Africa if they weren't being able to make the choices we had here, where it's a fabulous, fabulous career. And I suddenly realized that I was a surgeon operating with all the techniques, and it was reasonably new, so that this needed to be brought out into the programs. And the first thing I thought about was my alma mater, the Royal College of Surgeons, because just it was such a global place to be educated. And I went to the CEO of the college and shared with them my vision, and I understood that I had to actually get the endorsement of colleagues to even begin to do this. I also understood the rewards of somebody financing something that they could actually see the results with, and we were financing in specific parcels. So very, very honoured that some of my colleagues came in behind, some of my mentors, and were on the board. And other very experienced people in the field, like Mr. Tom Arnold, who was the head of a great Irish organisation called Concern at the time, brought huge experience. But I wanted to make impact, to be able to inspire the investors who were just normal citizens in the country who needed to understand. And at the time, I had been to the cinema watching a marvellous film, which was filmed across Africa, called The Constant Gardener. It involved the actor Ralph Fiennes. And lo and behold, he happened to be in Ireland at the same time, putting on a play in the Gate Theatre. So I just started emailing the Gate Theatre, his PA, non-stop, minimum twice a day. And I wore them down. And after 5 or 6 days, they answered. And they said, what? And meanwhile, I had met the wonderful former President of Ireland, President Mary Robinson, who was hugely experienced. And I just said to both of them, can you please launch this for me, please, officially in the Royal College of Surgeons, the home of this? And have you any idea how much needless blindness this can actually eliminate forever, sustainably, by empowering local surgeons? And they didn't hesitate. They immediately agreed. And it must have helped me. We managed to raise a lot of money quite quickly. And therein, we started a management consultancy specifically to go to all the existing surgeons and to empower them. So for example, the first hospital we opened was in the Congo in 2007, and we put an Indian surgeon in to put in the high volume. And that surgeon, working in one theatre, was doing 200 operations a week. But on top of that, he also came with a lot of additional training, and the cost of the procedure was a fraction. So we got it to, we took the Indian management consultancy system called Aravind. We sent experts from existing hospitals in Africa over to them for the first 4 years. After 4 years, we had capacity built. I think it was 35 hospitals in 9 African countries, and we had done 2 models in India just to make sure our technique was right. Again, all inspired by Aravind, but we found in Africa, unlike India, it was much, much more significant. The system wouldn't work. So in Africa, we got the cost of the surgery down to $50 per patient. But the wealthy people in the towns, the cities, the business people, they were traveling abroad for the same operation. And our high quality surgeons were then able to charge the wealthy people over €2,000 for very sophisticated operations. And that profit could easily cover the cost of some poor people for $50 a patient. So it was, we put in the models, and over the 4 years, we realized we had done that. We had proven that those systems would work. We only worked in hospitals where there was sustainability. We could guarantee another surgeon.
Thank you, Kate. And if we reflect on what you have said there and what David has brought to the table as well, we're looking at surgical innovation, which introduces new technology. We're looking at collaboration, communication, and connections. And one of the things that really blossoms within the RCSI family is that global network. And that's why we're here today as alumni, speaking together to our younger alumni, showing them what they can do now and into the future. And just as a interest for the audience this evening, the beginning of February, as part of this In Conversation meeting, we will have a global surgery symposium reviewing what we have achieved in collaborating with our colleagues around the world to open access to safe and timely surgical care. David, could you please talk to us about one of your journeys to Liberia, and perhaps one of the patients that struck you most in your time there? I notice you have some beautiful pictures behind you. You might talk us through some of those pictures, please.
A 4-year-old girl named Harriet, who lived in a small village outside of Monrovia, and whose mother noticed that her tummy was getting big over the year before that. It had gotten big enough so that the elders in the village thought that she was possessed by the devil, and she was being shunned, and nobody could figure out what was wrong with her. So she came into JFK Hospital in Monrovia, which is where we visit. So 4 of us went to see her and examined her, and then I said, so what does everybody think? And my colleagues all said, well, it's clearly fluid. She's got a fluid wave, and it's clearly fluid. And I had what I refer to as a light bulb moment, which I traced back directly to my training at RCSI. And I said, I agree that she has fluid, but most of the people who have ascites have a tense abdomen, because if you think about how the fluid forms, that's what happens. And I said, her abdomen is soft. We ended up calling her Jelly Belly because it was that soft. And I said, so I think that there is fluid, but it has to be contained by something other than her abdominal wall, which would mean a cyst. And if it is a cyst, then we can do something about it. So we booked her for surgery. That was on a Friday that we saw her. We booked her for surgery on Monday. We operated on her, and it was indeed a non-communicating enteric duplication cyst attached to the greater curve of her stomach. We took it out intact. It weighed 9 pounds. She weighed 39 pounds. And I was pretty happy. When I thought about it afterwards, I realized that if we hadn't been there, she would not have been operated on. And if she wasn't operated on, I think her future was pretty grim. So I thought then, and I still think now, having been a surgeon for 40 years, I think that's probably the best thing I've ever done. And I have a picture of me holding her, which is my prized possession. I love that picture. I'm a ridiculous optimist, but I sincerely believe that if you can do that, if you can make one life better, we never know, particularly with a child, you never know what's going to happen. And maybe that child is going to change the world. So that's where I get, that's part of the joy I get out of doing what we do.
Thank you, David. And thank you for sharing the story of that wonderful patient who had such an amazing outcome. And I think you touch upon many things there, because it's very important that we find meaning in what we do. And you have described how a surgeon can give back and reignite their joy for and the privilege of being a surgeon by working in different places. But I'd like to ask Kate, could you tell us about one of your light bulb moments, as David says, and maybe share a patient encounter that again encouraged you to keep doing what you're doing, please?
The patient encounter moment, I was having that in my own practice in Dublin in Blackrock Clinic. I never had a week where somebody didn't put their arms around me because they could suddenly see better. And everything that drives me is that it's needless blindness that we are eliminating. We're not talking about illnesses or anything. We're talking about something that can be fixed immediately if the resources are put there. And then in doing so, we are giving our colleagues the skill set and equipment to deal with all the other causes of sight issues and problems. But this problem is completely fixable, needless. And that would be the cataract surgery problem. I'm passionate about the preventable side. So from a light bulb moment, There are a few with different impact. One day I was meeting the Minister for Health in Kenya, and he just had somebody in with him. And as that person was leaving, a gentleman, he said, "Actually, Kate, I think you might like to meet this person." And he called the gentleman back in. And actually, I haven't met this person for a while. His name was Dr. Hilary Rono, and he had just come back from volunteering in a very remote part of northeast Kenya. And he was going up to offer a cataract surgery camp for the Maasai tribe. They had no eye care service, population of over 2 million nomads. And he was in with the Minister for Health to beg for resources to set up a facility in this town called Rombo in northeast Kenya. But he shared a moment where he said he literally, the day before, had been with a patient who was blind, and she just said, "Please, I want you to do my cataract so that I can see my family before they die of starvation." And it's astonishing when David talks about the scalability. None of us knows the impact of the problem we're solving on everybody around them. So there was a terrible famine in northeast Kenya at the time. But weirdly, I was invited to speak at the AGM of Rotary Ireland a few years ago, and I shared our experience. And because Rotary have an astonishing organisation where the Gates Foundation will leverage all their fundraising to eliminate the polio crisis, but that's nearly eliminated. And I feel strongly the next thing to be delivered should be telemedicine, teleophthalmology, to catapult the technology to bring change at a much faster pace and scalability around the world. So it made sense to me to start speaking to Rotary, and then Rotary in Clontarf and Lisburn went ahead and they built a hospital in a site where they were already doing a school and a water project in the same town, Rombo in Kenya, and that opened 2 years ago by coincidence. And I just got Right to Sight America to send funds to Rotary Kenya because we've been registered in America now, so a donor can get complete tax relief from any donation. I'm doing a plug here into Right to Sight International in America, and we bought a microscope for this hospital, a cataract surgery microscope. So this is recently, so that was very moving. That weirdly came to full circle. Rotary chose Rombo, I hadn't, but I'd had the conversation with one of the few surgeons many years earlier. And Right to Sight Norway has a lovely video made by Ned O'Hanlon in Dublin, a superb video in Cameroon of these two mothers bringing their boys in, age 6 and 7, to have their sight restored. And that's hard to believe, the wonder in the boy's face. It's astonishing. The biggest thing in ophthalmology at the moment is what's happening. We're a visual specialty, and astonishing technology. It's never been there before. And we can deliver so much through telemedicine, teleophthalmology, uniquely, that also pertains to other diseases in the body, such as hypertension and diabetes in particular. With that, I set up a company called iKey, a social enterprise, and we established it in 2017. And we have developed and published the algorithm that will automatically, with 97% accuracy, verify that the optic nerve is the same as it always was. And we have also developed other algorithms on the platform to say if any bits of it are changing, and with more certainty than a doctor could, because these are subtle changes. And now the company this year is at the very exciting stage where we are about to launch a household way of taking these images, and hopefully also get this technology into every eye care practitioner practice. So anybody could walk in off the high street, ask the optician to give them their photograph. It could go onto their phone and then go into the app, and they can keep it forevermore, and it can be eye-keyed at any stage. So that will feed into what is happening with all my colleagues in artificial intelligence on the eye, where there are you could send that image up to other platforms. You could be living in the middle of Kenya, Ethiopia, anywhere, send the photograph up to the cloud, and it will automatically make a diagnosis, helping in particular with diabetes, for example, which is Dr. Trina Jacobson's specialty. And we are hoping, and this is one of Trina's goals, is that these photographs will become so ubiquitous. Like, I want every mobile phone shop to be able to enable that on anybody's phone, and mobile phones are all over Africa. And it will become so ubiquitous that we will be able to detect diabetes from the photo on the phone instead of patients coming in sick into the hospitals. And this is where telemedicine is going. What's happening now is it's crossing the line between the subspecialties. And we can bring the ophthalmology knowledge of how the blood vessels are, how the nerve is, to all the specialties. For example, we can tell renal disease from the photograph. We can tell Alzheimer's in certain patients using artificial intelligence. We can tell the age of the person a lot of the time. And we can absolutely know about the state of the diabetes, the blood vessels, blood pressure problems. And this is very, very useful information across medicine. So what's happened is the barriers are breaking down to enable much more cross-specialty support. And again, the experts will be freed up to focus on really new, exciting surgical techniques and laser techniques that can help even more people.
Thank you, Kate. And as we know, in the last 2 years, particularly in Ireland, and we're a small country, a lot of our medical care in a primary care setting, and indeed in some hospital outpatients, has been delivered through a telehealth platform. At my own hospital, the Royal Victoria Eye and Ear, where you train, Kate, and I currently have the privilege of working as a consultant, we have set up a very forward-thinking group of people who are now able to see, assess, and manage that older patient at home through this type of platform. And I certainly think that what you describe in the tele-eye health area, it could revolutionize the ability of young people to access appropriate care. David, what I would like to ask you now is, how could we circle back and again link some of what you learned at RCSI and some of what you're doing now to the clinical skills that you were taught as a medical student in Dublin?
What I appreciated, I think I appreciated it at the time, but certainly subsequently in my career, what I really appreciated about my surgeon's education was not only the amount that I learned, but the way it got put into my head, and the sort of process of thinking about problems and how to solve problems. And I still, anybody can get a CAT scan these days in the United States. There's probably one on almost every corner. But it's really much more satisfying and a much, I don't know if it's better, but examining the patient and having a conversation with the patient. Mr. Brown and other people at surgeons used to tell us that you could make a diagnosis 85% of the time by talking with the patient. And I still believe that. It also provides a really interesting experience to actually talk to patients and find out where they're coming from and what their life has been like. It's an opportunity that I'm afraid too many of the younger people are missing out on these days. But I still, that for me, that was a lot of the surgeon's experience.
Thank you, David. And I would certainly share your experience. I too was a student in the Richmond. Many wonderful consultant trainers. I do believe that the legacy of clinical acumen, clinical examination, is something that every medical student graduating from RCSI continues to have. And that is imparted to them by our head of the School of Medicine, Professor Arnie Hill, and the superb team of senior lecturing staff led by Dr. Ghazi Ofaya. No student qualifying from RCSI gets out without knowing how to examine the body from top to toe. And that will always stay with you. And as we encourage people to come and study at this college, we always tell them about our exposure to patients, taking the history, sharing in the patient's journey, and coming up with a differential diagnosis based on your clinical evaluation. Kate, I'm going to put you on the spot and ask you to tell us about some key moment when you were a student at RCSI, clinically in the Richmond or whichever hospital you were lucky enough to train in, please.
Thank you, Camilla. I have to laugh because even pushing a trolley from the operating theatre as an intern across the street with umbrellas in case the patient got wet on the way back to their ward, I mean, I just have to laugh. And we used to have to do an 80-hour-a-week rota. And again, I loved Harold Brown and his teaching. I'm thinking, but there were two mentors who completely changed the way I think. And they led me to understand, or they taught us, that there's never ever a problem. There's just something that the solution hasn't been worked out to. And be that based with the medical findings or clinical findings or the actual treatment. And a lot of us in our class in college and in the other years seem to have done a huge amount of research and got involved with a lot of postgraduate research. And I think there was a very strong questioning mentality. We had one professor, he was the professor of surgery at the time, Professor David Boucher Hayes, Lord rest him. And he always said to us, you're not allowed to ask the question unless you know the answer. And in other words, you really have to thought it out before you asked the question. And he insisted that each of us on the professorial intern team had to do a research project. And then it was he who told me to do the research degree in electrophysiology of the eye afterwards, knowing our career. All of us were pushed down those roads and they were very meaningful. But the other person who was the super mentor was Professor Peter Eustace, who was our ophthalmology lecturer. And 7 of our year did ophthalmology, including Salwan Rassam from Iraq, Rosemary Robinson from Kerry, Brent Weiser, George Duffy in Canada. And I'm still very connected with them in what I'm doing. And I think Peter was so enthusiastic. At that time, we had no MRI scanner in Ireland. And we were working in the Neurosurgical Centre for Ireland. And if a patient had a brain tumour, they needed the services of the ophthalmologist to locate the site of the tumour, which we can do based on all the different, midbrain systems and everything going through the eyes and revealed, and all the facial nerve. So every day they were seeing patients to map where the lesion was for the surgeon to operate. And I found this absolutely fascinating. When the patient did need an MRI scan, we had to fight to get on the plane to go to Germany with the patient. I never made that trip, unfortunately, because we all wanted a free trip. But still, that was the importance of the clinical findings and signs in those days. And any of my colleagues who did ophthalmology maintained that clinical basis, but also to problem solving. And that's where we are in ophthalmology. It's more ophthalmology now. The image of the fundus is going to become ubiquitous because the cameras have changed. One doesn't need skill to access it. Going forward, it has to be part of the general medical examination that every doctor does. And then there will be less of a shortage of the surgeons to focus on the problems that only a surgeon could deal with, because there is a huge amount of pathology where we're looking at the raw blood vessels and, renal disease, hypertension, everything, diabetes in particular, just sitting on the photograph of the nerve now without any equipment. I could go on, Camilla, but
no, that really is really fascinating, because I think you show us the journey that a lot of surgical specialties have been on over the last 15 to 20 years, where we've gone from clinical evaluation, the introduction of diagnostics, and now we're at the stage of task shifting, where a lot of what we did before can be done by other trained healthcare professionals to allow the surgeon to operate on the more complex cases. You've also shone a lens on the need and benefit of introducing the concepts and the fundamental pathways of research engagement as a medical student, which will stand to you as you enter your postgraduate training and your professional consultant life. And I'm glad to share with you some of the amazing work that our current president, Ronan O'Connell, has done over the last 2 years in establishing an Institute of Surgical Research with the help of Professor Michael Kearns to enshrine the role of surgical research within the training pathways of the surgeon.
Wow.
David, I'm going to come to a conclusion now, and I would like to ask you, what would you say, or what do you say to your medical students and your residents about the privilege and the joy of giving back?
I think that I'm very fortunate in that I've had I've had opportunities to give back, and I believe that I am an example of how it can be done. Before I did Liberia, I had taken a trip to Vietnam and Cambodia with a group of general surgeons, not to operate, but to learn about healthcare. And I met a plastic surgeon in Phnom Penh, Cambodia, who was telling me about a patient he had where he was doing some very intricate surgery. And I asked him if he had an operating microscope, and he said, no, this is Cambodia. I said, do you have a pair of loupes? And he said, no, I get paid $70 a month by the government to be a plastic surgeon, and I can't afford a pair of loupes. And I don't really know why, but I said to him, all right, I'm going to find a way to get you a pair of loupes. And as I thought about it on the way home, I was thinking, there must be a lot of surgeons in less developed countries whose surgery would be improved if they had magnification, if they had a pair of loupes. And as it turned out, one of the people on the trip was the woman who was the head of director of Operation Giving Back for the American College of Surgeons. And so I told her about this idea that I had, and I said, I'm sure somebody else has done this. She said, no. And I said, well, it's a really good idea, and so somebody can do it. And she said, well, it's your idea, and you have to do it. And I said, but I don't know how to do this. I don't know how. I have no idea. She said, you'll figure it out. And I did. And so that's where Loops Around the World started, and that's been reasonably successful. We've given out about 600 pair of loops to surgeons in 45 countries. That plastic surgeon in Phnom Penh, Lee Heng, who had inspired loops, when I told him that I was going to Liberia, he said, well, I want to come. I want to help. And I thought, really? And he said, yeah, absolutely. So I arranged to have him come to the United States, and then he and I flew to Liberia and spent 10 days in Liberia. As I said, he's a plastic surgeon in Cambodia. When you're a plastic surgeon in less developed countries, you're oftentimes doing more than just soft tissue plastic surgery. You do a lot of orthopedics. And so he spent a good deal of time while we were in Liberia working with Dr. Muvu, who was the orthopedic surgeon there. And then when we were coming home on the plane, he said, you know, Dr. Muvu needs a drill. They do a lot of external fixation, and that requires a lot of drilling. All he had was this little hand cranked drill. He said he really needs a drill. And I said, great, where am I supposed to get an orthopedic drill? And he said, you don't need to do that. You just need a drill. Where do you get a drill? I said, Home Depot. He said, fine. When we get back to Connecticut, let's go to Home Depot. So we got back to Connecticut. The next day we go down to Home Depot in Waterbury. We go to the portable rechargeable drill section, and he's looking at all the drills, and he said, this is the one he needs. And I said, okay, but how do you sterilize that? And he said, oh, that's easy. You got to get one that comes in a plastic case, and you just take a 4x4 gauze, soak it with formalin, throw it in the case, close the top, and in 6 hours, the formalin fumes will sterilize the drill. We do it all the time in Cambodia. And I said, really? Okay. And 6 months later, I brought a Makita drill to Dr. Mubu, who was absolutely ecstatic to have a drill. And the nurses in the operating room were equally ecstatic because he wasn't complaining anymore. It occurred to me that the process of global health, a lot of it has been from better developed countries, rich countries, to poor countries. But in fact, there's opportunity for a lot of sharing. And one of the many things that I learned from Lee Heng, the Cambodian plastic surgeon, was that he's already figured out a lot of tricks about how to do things in poorly resourced situations that none of us living in the United States have ever experienced before. And there's a lot of knowledge there that could be useful if it could be harnessed. Anyway, I talk about all of this stuff with medical students and residents all the time, and they are young and idealistic, and I hope that I can put a spark in them to get them to think about solving problems that are, some of them are small problems, some of them are big problems. But I have a lot of hope for the future of medicine, because I think that we can do this. We can go to a place like Liberia and we can educate the physicians in Liberia, but we also learn an awful lot about medicine and life. And you get to think. That's what I tell my residents. That's the real joy of working in a situation like that, is you've got to figure things out. It isn't obvious. It isn't in a protocol. You've got to figure it out. And I think that's part of the excitement about the excitement of practicing medicine.
Thank you, David. And just to talk a little bit about what you said in regards to the American College of Surgeons and Operation Giving Back. And here at RCSI, we have had the opportunity to work and collaborate through our engagement with the College of Sub-Saharan Africa, COSEXA, and one of the past presidents of the American College, Dr. Barbara Bass, and one of our own members and fellows, Dr. Hilary Sanfi, who have done tremendous work in mentoring women in surgery Africa. I think what you say, David, gives us great hope for the future, and that is the world is a small place, and through this global engagement, each one of us can make a difference at home and abroad, wherever that might be. And perhaps I might just go to ask Kate what her final words would be if she was talking to herself as a young RCSI student coming in through the doors of 123 St. Stephen's Green. I know you talk to our students, Kate, and they are in great awe of what you personally have achieved to date. But what would you say to yourself if you knew what you know now, please?
Well, thank you, Camilla. It's lovely to hear that. I think you've got to absolutely follow your heart and live in the moment. And when I went into College of Surgeons, it was 100% about fun. And I think that's really important. That's how I built all the relationships. I wasn't thinking about anything but qualifying. But because of that, all the friendships and I built and everything stood to me. And I think the bit that I find so hard to live with is the equality, the inequality of the equality, that the problems that are facing my colleagues in other countries, they're having an experience that I would feel horrified with the same things in front of me. And I was quite surprised in Africa so I felt in the mood to do what I did. For many years, I was training, I specialized in oculoplastics, I was doing lots of other things. The timing, if you're alert, the timing will happen at the right time. With the research I had done coming up to that seemed to have no bearing on what I ended up doing then, but it completely fed into the ideas and solutions I've invented now for technology and telemedicine. So I think the most important thing is to be tuned in, live in the moment, follow your passion, but never try to tell another colleague what they need. And I think in Africa, when people see dire need, there is an assumption that the local doctor or surgeon, will just take the help you're going to bring out to them. But they actually will often identify something we would never think of that would greatly allow them to scale up or leverage. And it was one of the things I found difficult to see people who were passionate about bringing help to resource poor settings and thinking that because our colleagues were in the resource poor setting, they knew less. and making that assumption. I think it's incredibly important not to decide to do something and then throw it at them, which unfortunately happens for the very best intentions, but it delays everything. And to be a partner for the colleague, to listen to them carefully, to share our learning, and then move forward with them in the journey, and to make sure it is sustainable. That if, God forbid, the pandemic comes, that all the donations you've got to buy everything you have don't disappear because the one colleague is sick. Has to be sustainable.
So I think, Kate, really you have summed up the whole concept of the delivery of global surgery. We know that the WHO sustainable goal is surrounding universal healthcare. And within that is the burden of unmet surgical need. But we need to partner with our colleagues. We need good communication. We need to collaborate, but we need a sustainable solution. And I believe that is what the RCSI Institute of Global Surgery, through our education and training engagements, are very good at delivering. It has been an honor and a privilege to sit here today with you, David, and my fellow classmate, Kate, and listen and learn about your journeys from RCSI Medical School to such stellar surgical careers, and how you both have pursued excellence and have given back when the time was right. I hope all of our alumni looking at this conversation are inspired to do more, to stay involved, and also to encourage those young people thinking about entering medical school. Look at RCSI. It's a truly global organization with alumni located all over the world. I'd like to say good night and thank you for joining us this evening. Safe journey and happy 2022.